Welcome back to the Bike City Woodworks channel. My name's Brian and today we're going to build this, a Kumiko lamp with a twist. Why don't we just get started? This lamp was my entry for the Rockler Bent Wood challenge put on by the Modern Maker podcast. I was excited to enter this challenge since I missed last year's plywood challenge, so after sketching some designs, I settled on a three-dimensional bent lamination. I had this vision in my head of a lamp with a helical shape. This was super hard to model in SketchUp, which is normally where I start with projects, so I had to fall back to drawings this time. I was thinking of a twisted leg connected with solid wood stretchers that would make a frame, and then I would fill in the frame with Kumiko panels. So far I've been milling my lumber in preparation for cutting the thin strips of wood that I'm going to bend. It's right about here where bent lamination takes a left turn from all of my other projects. I need really thin strips of wood that I can bend in this project. This method I've used a couple of times for cutting thin strips has served me really well. I use the back of a featherboard as a stop and run the wood through the saw, ripping off a strip at a time and resetting the fence as I go. Once I had cut about 80 strips, I began working on the form. To make each leg's helical shape, I used a piece of PVC pipe. It's light, rigid, and inexpensive. I tested a few diameters of PVC, 6 inches, 3 inches, and 1.5 inches, and I found that 1.5 inches was the best diameter for my application. Here's how I created a perfect curve around the form. I started by marking a straight line down the length of the pipe. A piece of wood or another straight edge makes this super easy. Then I marked the line on each end of the tube so I could see it from the side. Now I got a big sheet of paper and put the PVC line side down onto the paper. I marked where the lines were touching the paper at the ends. So now I have 2 points on the piece of paper. Now I rotated the pipe as many degrees as I wanted to twist around the form. I chose 180 degrees for this lamp. I marked the paper on just one side where the pipe is touching it. So now I have 3 points and I can connect all 3 of those points to form a triangle. I cut out the triangle with a sharp blade and then taped the triangle to the pipe. I was sure to put the longest leg of the paper triangle against the line I drew. Then, I used masking tape along the hypotenuse of the triangle to make a sweeping curve around the pipe. Once I established the masking tape line, I started to glue up the strips. I used spring clamps to hold the strips around the form and applied glue to one side of each strip and stacked them with the glue side down, one at a time, until I had made a 3/4 inch thick leg. To make sure the legs laminated well, I applied pressure with a bunch of rubber bands and some strategically placed trigger clamps while the legs cured. After letting the legs sit overnight, I used the end of the form as a saw guide to cut the ends of the legs flat. Then it took a lot of hand sanding. I actually tried using power sanders for this, but it didn't work well at all. So I got out a block of wood, shaped it to match the radius of the inside curve on the leg with my hand plane, and wrapped a sanding disc around it to start sanding. And sanding. And sanding. With the legs finally smooth, I turned my attention to the mortises. I have this surface that isn't flat, isn't straight, and is coplanar only in very specific places along the leg, and I need to get my mortises right so I would have a square lamp. The result? This contraption of a jig that holds each leg completely level and still. I'd show you how to make this, but to be honest, I was too caught up in trying to get it to work to film it. I felt like I was lost the entire time, and if you have a better way to do this, please let me know in the comments down below. Now to actually cut the mortises, I had a couple choices. I could do it by hand and drill the waste with the drill press, but I wouldn't be able to mark a square tenon on this piece, so that was out. I could do it with a hollow chisel mortiser, which is probably the easiest way, but I realized I couldn't fit the jig into the bed of the mortiser that I have access to. So I decided to use a router for the mortise and make round tenons. cutting the first mortises with the router. With the first mortises made, I had to figure out how to cut the second side. I was presented with the same problems as with the first side, but now I had the added complexity of making sure the second set were square to the first. So I made this next jig, which holds the legs square to the router on these two dowels. Using the router again to establish the second mortises. With all of the mortises cut, finally I can turn my attention to the stretchers. I started by ripping the stretchers on the table saw, and then because I had round mortises, I had to make round tenons. For this, I just used the lathe. Then I dry fit the stretchers into the legs so I could start scribing where they'd meet. As you can see here, the straight tenon shoulder meets a curved leg, so each leg needs to actually be custom fit. To scribe the legs, I used a cheap compass, but you can use a pair of dividers or even a pencil and a washer. Then I spent time massaging the fit for each stretcher until they made it to the legs as seamlessly as possible. The final part of the frame construction is to create a lamp socket. I started by measuring and marking 2 stretchers to hold the lamp attachment. And I lost the footage, but I routed a stop rabbet on the router table on each of these stretchers. And then I cleaned up the rabbets with a chisel. Then, I cross-cut the lamp attachment from another piece of cherry, made a rabbet on each end to match the rabbet on the stretchers, and drilled for the lamp socket on the drill press. Then I could glue up the lamp, first by assembling the 2 sides, then gluing the 2 sub-assemblies together. With the lamp frame done, I could focus on the Kumiko. Originally I was going to be much more complex with my panels, but the frame beat me up pretty bad, so I decided to make a simple shoji panel this time. I mean, I can always replace them for something more complex later. Anyway, I make the panels like I make any Kumiko pattern, creating cross laps for the frame, then gluing the panel together. Finally, I backed all of the panels with some handmade mulberry paper using acid-free double-sided tape. I have more details on this process in my mini Kumiko lanterns video, which you can catch in the cards. Some final sanding and finishing before I could install the lamp cord, and then the panels. And it's all done. Thank you so much for getting this far, and thank you to the Modern Maker podcast for creating this challenge. The word challenge is a huge understatement for this project, but I feel like I've grown a ton doing it. If you like this video, please share it with others who might also like to see it. That's the best way to help me out. Oh, and if you'd like to subscribe and hit the thumbs up, that'd be incredible too. Thanks again, and see you on the next project.